Welcome back to Bleach Revisited, the series in which I, your host, Karkor Gold, am revisiting the entire Bleach manga to provide analysis and review response, as well as connections to the rest of the manga. As always, this is an unscripted review set into 3 parts, so if any of those other parts interest you more, feel free to hop around in the video. Without further ado, let us begin with Chapter 25. Chapter 25, June 17th, OP9, A Fighting Boy 2, The Cigarette Blues Mix. Ow! Ow! Stop screaming. The wounds that sustain you as a Kanpaku stay with you when you return to your material body. You should know that by now. But you always healed them before I returned to my body. I'm sorry. I used so much of my power healing the big hole in your chest that I couldn't heal the rest of you. Thanks. Also, any pain you don't feel in battle is felt more acutely when you return to your body. You're going to be hurting a lot. Here, fix your face. I lost, didn't I? What do you mean? He got away, but we took no casualties. You definitely won. He's not dead. Ichigo. Sorry. See you later. This sucks. I'm so soggy, I can't get up. Bleach. Whoop. Sorry about that. Chapter 25, June 17th, OP9, Fighting Boy 2, The Cigarette Blues Mix. Sorry, I couldn't avenge your death, Mother. Hey! I was wondering where you went, Ichigo. Take this! I don't need it. I'm already drenched. It doesn't matter whether I have one or not. Time flies. She's been gone for 10 years. 6 years! I was close. You were off by 4 years. That's the difference between a grade schooler and a high schooler. You're a smart boy. Daddy's impressed. Don't be. Just remember how long it is since your wife died. Of all the... Talking to you just annoys the heck out of me. Well, if she sees how well you're doing, it'll make her feel good over there. But, that's right. He doesn't know. Huh? What? Mom's soul was eaten. Never mind. It's nothing. When did you start smoking? When Yuzu and Karen were born. She told me that when we first started seeing each other, she thought I looked cool when I smoked. You know something. That was the only time your mother ever told me I looked cool. So I decided to have a smoke on this day every year in front of her. Cheer up! Ah! Don't be such a wet blanket. How? How can you joke about it? Why don't you hold it against me? I felt to protect her. I couldn't do a single thing to save her. I still can't. Why? Why doesn't everybody blame me? It was my fault. I wish you guys would hate me. Why don't you? Why should I blame you? Huh? Misaki would be mad at me if I did that. It's not your fault that she died. I'm proud of her. The woman I loved gave her life trying to protect her child. And don't forget, that child was you. Dad. You lucky punk! Ah! Live a good life, Ichigo. Live a good, long life. Go bald and die after I do. And, if you can, Die laughing. If you don't, I won't be able to face her. So stop sulking. You're not old enough for the cool, tortured look. See you down the hill. Are you there, Rukia? Are your Soul Reaper powers returning? Whether they are or not, let me be a Soul Reaper for a little while longer. I want to become strong. Incredibly strong. Enormously strong. So I can protect people from the Hollows. I'm going to get strong and kill that monster. If I don't, I could never face my mother. Ichigo. Ah! Shut up. I'm gonna tear you to pieces right here. You ran away without even using all of your powers. You played with them too much. Right. You should know, when you fight a Soul Reaper, you go right for his head. Sorry. It's too late for sorry. I warned you. I don't like to clean up your messes. Don't say that. Look, we got his mask off. This fiasco will not be repeated. Right, Grand Fisher? Right. I'll never give a Soul Reaper a chance again. Ichigo Kurosaki. To be continued in Volume 4. Here is the data of Bleach. Overall attendance number 3, female student number 1, Tatsuki Arasawa. 155 centimeters, 41 kilograms, blood type AO, date of birth July 17th. Karate team, joined as a black belt, second degree. Has known Ichigo since they were 4 years old. Likes shorts and cargo pants. Belongs to student disciplinary committee. Worries that her name in kanji isn't cute, so she makes a point of writing in hiragana. She likes apple pie. The theme song, How? Mo aoi tori wa tobanai. Tobanai? No. The Bluebirds Don't Fly Anymore, recorded in Love Letter. That's Tatsuki Arasawa. Isshin Kurosaki. 186 centimeters, 80 kilograms, blood type AB, date of birth December 10th. Head of the Kurosaki family, local doctor, can do everything except for major surgery. Likes potato bean paste cakes. Favorite celebrity is John Lee Hooker. He was actually supposed to be a mortician instead of a doctor until the very last minute this manga was published, so he looks better in a black suit than a white gown. Theme song, Social Distortion, Don't Drag Me Down, recorded in white light, white heat, white trash. That is it for Volume 4 of the manga and Chapter 25 of Bleach. So, hopefully you enjoyed that chapter. I think it's a pretty good one. Closes out this entire story arc and this volume. And I've got things to say about it, so let's hop right into the analysis here. So starting here with Bleach Chapter 25, making sure, I believe it does start on this page. So we get Ichigo being thrust back into his body. He's still got these wounds. This is something that hasn't been really mentioned though before. Is that the wounds that he sustains as a spirit stay with him whenever he returns to his material body, which is curious because he gets pretty wrecked. She cured the big hole in his chest, but couldn't fix up his face as much, right? So, he thinks back on it, and Ichigo's thinking that he lost the battle because he didn't defeat his enemy. But again, Rukia really is coming from this perspective of, there were no casualties if you're fighting to protect your honor and, people's lives. Hey, look, all of that was done, right? You definitely won. And, we get a lot of these really long shots of the characters. Lots of very good kind of emotional, beats. There are a lot of, I noticed in this, and there's a little bit of this last time, but even more of it here where we have these inconsistent panel heights. I think mostly to kind of give the sense that these characters are in a different place. I think that like kind of emotionally what they're going through is a little different. And of course, we don't even get this full shot of Ichigo, as as you'll see her later. Clearly, he's got more on his mind. Khan's hating this. He's so soggy he can't get up. I like this as like kind of punctuating that scene. We hop into the cover for the chapter. Pretty cool. Ichigo with the 15 on his shoes. Coming back to the gravestone, he's talking to his mother's grave, saying that he couldn't avenge her. And we get this pretty good kind of finally like a moment of like maturity maybe from Ishin. Or we've gotten a little bit of that before, but we haven't really gotten Ishin given like any sort of a lot of dialogue or anything like that before that point. Um, yeah, I love this very comedic. He's getting tapped in the ear with the umbrella, and he just snatches it and knocks Ishin across the face. Um, yeah, this whole he can't even remember how long ago his life died. He's kind of playing silly, and Ichigo finally like wonders like why he can be kind of so you know lighthearted about it. I guess first of all he justifies it like yeah, well he doesn't know that she's not passed on, but that she's had her soul devoured, so maybe he doesn't have this sort of same anguish over it. Uh, we get Ishin being kind of cool, right? That she told me that I looked cool whenever I smoked. So he has a cigarette. You know, whenever he visits her grave, it's kind of sentimental, right? It certainly evokes also the idea of kind of like lighting incense, right? So it's a way of him kind of memorializing her in a sense. Um, yeah, I believe that Ichigo's shirt says shattered. Not going to read that much into it, given that we do have a shattering of Mask and maybe a fracturing of his sense of duty or whatever. I don't know. I'm not going to read that much into it. Anyway, one of the few things that I think is just maybe stylistic. I think that's just a word that Kubo likes. It does come up a few times throughout, like the naming of different things in Bleach. Anyway, yeah, it's like she's the only time that she ever told me I looked cool, which is pretty funny. Um, and yeah, he's noticing, Ishin I think notices like how much Ichigo is really kind of suffering metaphorically, not physically. Obviously, he's a little bandaged up, which begs the question of what's going on, right? Because of course, like it's like, oh, we don't know where our sisters are. You gotta go find our sisters. You brought them all to this, shrine. Started raining. Ishin's like, oh well, I guess I'll go find Ichigo, right? So it's kind of unclear from Ishin's point of view what's going on, right? But he sees that his son's in kind of an emotional place, and so he asks Ichigo to kind of cheer up a little bit. And this is where Ichigo really breaks, and he's been struggling with this for like a long time throughout here. I also like again this use of like extreme highlights and shadows. I mean, obviously just kind of on the blacks of the clothes, but you know, kind of cool. We get this nice detail on the umbrella as well. I think it's all just drawn pretty well as we get this Ichigo who's really still like here again facing away, really blaming himself. Um, he's wondering like why other people don't hate him. Why no one else blames him? Um, that he wishes that like they just would, right? That it would be simpler that way. That whenever they don't, like he feels like he has a lot of anguish over this, right? That he's really caught up in this, and he doesn't see how other people could be, so happy about it. And we get Ishin having a completely different take on this, right? Where Ichigo's at this really emotional moment. I like that we turn into Ishin just being like, "Why would I do that?" you know, it's like, yeah, it's not your fault she died. I'm proud that she gave up her life to protect you. You know, And really, I love this shot of Ishin. Really like sells like his like levity and like his character as being this like really kind of carefree sort of. And I say carefree, obviously he's not carefree, but he chooses to live like a happier life, right? And then he has this different perspective on things. Um, but yeah, I love, of course, the moment he lands on, which is that, of course, the child that she chose to give her life to protect was Ichigo, and so like that's like significant and meaningful to him, and that like he takes that like less as like a huge horrible like thing, like, oh, Ichigo, I blame you for your mother's death, which would be like the kind of pessimistic way to take it. Instead, he's like, he sees it as this kind of beautiful thing that his wife loved her children so much that she would, give her life, as she literally did, like, right, gave her life to protect Ichigo, um, and that she died protecting this incredibly important thing, and that like especially thinking about Ichigo's name being like the one that protects, right? And so like Ichigo kind of embodying that aspect of his mother. When we talked about that before, the idea that all of the Kurosaki children kind of embody a different aspect of their mother. And so, of course, Ishin doesn't see that as like a failure on Ichigo's part. Rather, he sees that as like, of course your mother would die, protecting you, because like that's who you are, right? You're the person who also like has embodied that aspect of her. And so, like, don't have that much grief about it, right? That like the important thing is that you live and you be happy and that you appreciate like everything that she did for you. I love that he, gives him this big kick, tells him he's lucky, and tells him like, yeah, like live a good life, like live long, go bald, die after I do, die laughing if you can. Because he's like, if you don't, I won't be able to face her, right? That like essentially Ishin's goal in life now is to give Ichigo a good life, right? That like if Ishin were to be like really resentful or to treat Ichigo worse because of it or to hate him or whatever, like that would just be kind of spitting in Masaki's memory. That would be, you know, kind of undoing everything that his wife was looking to protect, right? So obviously Ishin wants to do like the very best for his children. Like he wants to basically do everything that he can to keep those bonds strong. Um, yeah, you're not old enough for the cool tortured look. Uh, and yeah, just great moments from Ishin in general. And of course, after all of that, we have him really set back to us, right? Where maybe he has the cool tortured old look, but like I don't, he's obviously not that tortured about it because he's chosen to live this kind of more optimistic lifestyle, right? Um, and then try to make the most out of the life that he has, that he's, and that all these connections that he still has because his wife gave her life to keep those people alive. So again, it's a big thing in Bleach, right? This idea of trauma and loss and death, especially, and how that connects people and how that can like mold their ethos, right? The way that they go about their lives, the way that they believe in things, what motivates them, what makes them kind of operate in the ways they do. And so finally we get some insight into Ish and the why he is the way he is, why he's so, over the top and kind of comical and joyous despite everything. He's very childlike almost in how exuberant he is. But it's because he wants to fill his days with like laughter and love, right? He'd rather be that way instead of kind of cool and tortured. He doesn't think that's, you know, even though he's certainly old enough for it, he doesn't think that to be the kind of way he should live his life. Uh, and so seeing that, of course, I love, Ichigo is like, "Hey, are you there, Rukia?" And we immediately get this. I love this shot of, we ask him that. We zoom up to kind of this perched up part of the area, the graveyard, and of course Ruki is there, sitting like observing everything from this tree, and we finally get a reminder of her Soul Reaper powers, right, and whether or not they're returning. Ichigo finally, we have kind of a circle come to here where before Ichigo was really doing this because he felt like he owed Rukia, right? He felt like he would he would be kind of like it would make him less of a worthwhile person, right? Like he's not the kind of punk to not pay back this sort of debt that he has to Rukia, as well as to have his power and not protect the people that he can. But now he's driven instead by like this internal motivator now, right? Instead of it being extrinsic, instead of it coming from just this sort of bond that he has with Rukia solely, right? Everything that she's done and the onus of the position and all of that. Now it's coming intrinsically from what he wants, right? Now Ichigo wants to become strong enough to protect people from hollows, and strong enough to kill Grand Fisher. And so finally we get like this kind of closure on this arc for Ichigo, where instead of, one of the big things that I think, is often levied against Ichigo, right? A big point of criticism is that people will often parrot the idea that he's this reactionary protagonist. Ichigo's reactionary. He's always reacting to stuff, Grand Fisher shows up and then he fights him. It's not like he's going out to go look for him, right? Ichigo has powers thrust upon him. And I think that's by and large bullshit. But I think also I don't think having a character that's more reactionary than actively kind of making this plot happen makes it a worse manga either. So, different strokes, right? But the big thing kind of takeaway is, here we get this movement of Ichigo towards these intrinsic desires, right? If you want to talk about reactionary, as a protagonist trait, negative or positive, right? That's the idea, is that it would be a protagonist that's very motivated by the things that happen outside of them, right? The kind of extrinsic kind of motivators, right? They have these other things that are pulling them into these directions, right? They're being affected on by these other forces. But here we see Ichigo finally kind of, really asserting what he wants and what he's going to do, and that he wants to become incredibly strong so that he can protect people from hollows. And yeah, protection's a kind of reactionary thing, right? He's not like, I want to eradicate all hollows. But he does have, this one singular, like, I'm going to kill that monster, right? So Ichigo still has this sense of, extreme personal kind of vengeance, but I think it's also tied into kind of this morality where he's like, I can't let creatures like that exist, right? Um, and he wants to be strong enough to be able to like quell that sort of threat to humanity. So in a lot of ways, he's starting to maybe understand a little bit more of the Soul Reaper creed, perhaps. But I think moreover, this is just a catalyzation of everything that's been there for Ichigo before, right? Where he wanted to protect his family and these people that he has these bonds to, but now he understands like the full gravity of the situation with Hollows, and that really he wants to have the strength to send that protection out to anybody, so that he doesn't have to see people like his father, have to live these ways where it feels like maybe they're they could live with regrets, or they could live in a way where they're compromising, some aspect of themselves, perhaps, right? Uh, and certainly he doesn't want anybody else to go through the same anguish that he has. So it's kind of a cool moment for Ichigo to kind of land on, and then of course we get the full expression of Ichigo very defiantly, talking about refraining what Ishin just said about facing his mother, right? And so for Ishin, he needs Ichigo to grow strong, like not grow strong, but like to live a lovely and happy and wonderful life, right? And if Ichigo's not able to do that, then Ishin has failed as like through this bond, right, that he has had with Masaki. But here, Ichigo's sort of bond with Masaki is now he realizes isn't like this one where he's like blaming himself or anything like that, but instead it's kind of transformed where he's realized, thanks to what Ishin said, that he needs to be this protector figure, that he needs to be able to protect others, to be able to kind of have that strength to do that, to be like his mother was, where she gave her life protecting him, and that like he's really inherited that soul to an extent, or like that aspect of her. um and if he doesn't strive towards that, of course he couldn't face his mother. So it's something to strive towards, just like what Ishin has is something to strive towards. um it's not just like, oh, if I can't beat Grand Fisher, I won't be able to face my mother. It's really this idea of being so strong as to be able to protect others. Um, when you get this lovely shot from Rukia, she's kind of, like Ichigo. She's got a bit of a smile, and then we get this full shot of the moon, which is, again, the moon's really tied to and punctuates these encounters with hollows, though it's usually obviously that crescent moon. So this full moon kind of speaks maybe towards some other things, like maybe a maturation of that sort of encounter and that spirituality, and this entire journey, but maybe also speaks towards this larger threat as we hop back and we have this other hollow character that we haven't seen before, kind of tearing away at he says, I'll tear you to pieces, but it's Grand Fisher's on some sort of operating table almost, right, being sort of worked at. And it's mentioned that he was playing too much and that he ran away without even using all of his powers. So we get the sense of Grand Fisher as this greater antagonist, but also we get to see that there are yet, of course, hollows that are more kind of maybe sophisticated or even more powerful than Grand Fisher, right? So we get these other sort of looming threats. We also get a little bit more of, like, obviously hollows aren't just these beasts, like clearly they operate on each other. There's like this kind of crazy room that he's in that's like almost like a pit that he's being operated in. We get this other character that's kind of sat over the pit, and we can see the hole in their body, right? I don't think we can see this other character's hole, but I mean, we see their mask. We can tell that they're hollow, but their mask is cracked. We see a bit of the human face underneath, right? And we see this other character who, even though they've got this hole, we can certainly see human features as well. I'm trying to figure out kind of what's going on with this entire shape down here, right? Like, this is very clearly this character, but maybe there's something else over here that I can't quite make out. But he's talking about, like, he refrains this sort of, whenever you fight with a Soul Reaper, you go straight for his head, right? You don't play around with them. So you get this sort of mirroring of ideologies, right? Where, again, with the Soul Reapers, with Rukia, she's like, oh, you go right for the Hollow's head, right? You strike it, and kill it immediately, ideally, so that you don't have to, deal with the consequences of it's like, it's humanity, right? But here, I think this is that advice, but in a much more malicious, like, if you toy around with your prey rather than immediately going to kill them, then I think the idea is that you're going to be lulled more into this sense of, being dominant or kind of toying around or being in control, and then that could lead to a slip up. You should just try to kill them immediately. So it's this brutality, kind of on the sake of these hollows, right? We get, I don't like to clean up your messes. I love these crazy square looking teeth. Really sells this character's his otherness. We get this nice shot of his hole, which, of course, I think it takes a moment to mention that we get that crescent moon again in the crescent of, like, seeing the hollow hole seen that way, but it's flipped. Instead of white on black, it's black on white, and we'll get a lot of those inversions of color for hollows, especially going on. That hollows will often be depicted wearing whites, as opposed to the Shinigami black, right? Certainly the white of their mask is maybe meant to already be a little bit of that early on. But speaking of mask, here's his mask is being, cracked and torn, and they specifically say, like, look, we got his mask off. This fiasco won't be repeated, right, Grand Fisher? And Grand Fisher moves to stand, covered in blood, but also with just half of his mask. And instead of the bestial hollow that he was, he now stands looking much more human than ever before, right? And so, those things that were holes in the mask now become like kind of face markings as he says he'll never give a Soul Reaper a chance again. And then he's coming probably for Ichigo, right? He keeps Ichigo in mind. So we really get the sense of this new and renewed threat, these more human looking hollows, uh, more than ever. And Grand Fisher, maybe even more powerful than before, reinvigorated, taking on a new form with Ichigo in mind. So we've kind of built into this grander threat that's been established, of course, right as the volume ends. um, and we get lovely cigarette kind of left on the headstone, perhaps. We get a little bit of the characters. We get this kind of merging of Tatsuki being kind of a rough physical sort of character, but also wanting to have kind of cute aspects to her. I like, of course, the note that he was supposed to be more mortician, so he looks better in a black suit than a white gown. But you know, this kind of melding of those ideas. Yeah, cute stuff. Neat chapter. I really like this chapter. Of course, I like a lot of these chapters. I like Bleach. But I think where this chapter really works is like you know using everything in this arc to give a lot of depth, surprisingly, to Ishin, who is a character that didn't have very much before, but also to kind of bring Ichigo's journey to a forward-facing sort of goal. Um, so yeah, that's like you know it's really cool. I like this kind of conclusion for Ichigo because there's a lot of ways that you could bring this, and I love especially Ishin kind of being like, hey, you're too young for that sort of cool tortured sort of thing, which is so anime. I mean, you constantly see like the struggling, tortured sort of protagonist, right? You get that a lot. I mean, speaking of contemporaries, obviously you don't get that as much in One Piece. I mean, clearly there's the moments where something very tragic happens, and you see a little bit more of that side of Luffy. But for the most part, Luffy's this sort of carefree, sort of upbeat and I don't know, not whimsical, but very very cheerful sort of character. He does have his very serious moments later on, though. Um, but thinking about Naruto especially has a lot of this like darkness to him, right? And until really you get into later stuff in Shippuden, Naruto early on has like he's got this demon fox inside of him, and he's ostracized from the community, and you know he's gonna fight for like making these friends and these connections, and what he believes in, and becoming the top ninja or whatever. But like he's got this tortured sort of cool tortured thing going on, and especially Sasuke. Sasuke's whole character is cool tortured boy, and you look to stuff like, of course, Naruto. Of course, draws a lot of inspiration from Dragon Ball Z, but also Hunter x Hunter, where you see a lot of that kind of in Killua, as well as other characters too. But yeah, you get a ton of that in him, and then the other boy, like a good half the cast. um, and even thinking about that, whenever there's spoilers, by the way, for Hunter x Hunter, don't worry about it. I'm gonna throw you for a loop here, but I think Bleach is probably the better manga. But we can talk about that in the comments. Don't want to try to piss anyone off. At the very least, I enjoy Bleach more. I can certainly see why someone would like Hunter more, and I don't think that one's like objectively better than the other. I think it's all media. It's all subjective. It all depends on what your tastes are. But spoilers for that. There is a moment where, of course, the main character has more of a tortured sort of moment where he's supposed to be tortured and cool, and they deliberately age the character up physically for that moment. Um, Maybe because drawing him as the childlike figure that he was in that moment would also be kind of underselling it. So it's interesting that there's this kind of current of this sort of cool, tortured kind of character uh, in shonen manga, especially, and I like that Ishin says like don't be that kind of guy, right? Like you're too young for that. Like enjoy your life, right? Have a happy life. Um, and I like that Ichigo's takeaway from this isn't like yeah, he's like I'm gonna kill that guy, Grand Fisher, but like his immediate takeaway, of course, is like yeah, I got to become strong enough to protect these people from hollows, right? So it's kind of a little bit more of a kind of I say wholesome, but it's less of a kind of edgy take that you could have from all of this. I mean, certainly we have Ichigo kind of leaning into a little bit of that teenage angst where he's like wondering why everybody doesn't hate him, and that like it would be maybe easier for him if they did, right? Because then it would feel like maybe the way that he feels, like the anguish that he feels, would align more with reality. But no, that's not the case, and I appreciate that a lot about Bleach. It's a nice kind of moment for those characters. And then of course we get this looming threat with these other hollows and with Grand Fisher maybe even seeing a power up there, right? Being transcended into this more humanoid form from his bestial state as his mask is slightly torn away. So that's all really interesting stuff, and that gives us a lot of kind of to look forward to, I think. Pretty early here in Bleach. I mean, we're only 25 chapters in, right? So, overall, like I said, I think really kind of emotional and sentimental chapter, but also does a lot of really strong things for these characters and the narrative, giving it kind of this forward facing momentum. Let's talk about spoilers. Let's talk about how this connects to the manga at large, because obviously there are a few connections, especially with this being so forward facing. Um, So first and foremost, yeah, if you're not looking for spoilers, if you're not looking to see how this connects to the rest of the manga, if you want to stay, unspoiled on the rest of the Bleach manga and kind of get these videos as they come or read it on your own, this is the time to get out the video. For everyone else, spoilers ahead. Let's get into it. So I like there's this interesting whole thing about like yeah, well, the wounds that you sustain will be stay with you whenever you return to your material body. You should know that by now. Excuse me. That gets brought up, and then I think it doesn't really matter. Like I don't remember that being like a huge kind of deal any other time ever. I guess there's everything with Masaki and her getting like that, the Gigai made for her and everything like that, but like the poison that she has from the Hollow and her Ryatsu. I don't know. It's I don't know that this aspect of the kind of sustained spiritual wounds carrying over the physical body ends up being that kind of the big of a thing. So whenever I read that, I was like, "What? Like, whoa!" That surprised me. Shattered. I mentioned that earlier, and that I wasn't going to read into it, and I think I still will stick by that. I won't read into it. Obviously, we have the mask shattering later in the chapter, and the idea of this kind of fractured identity, and maybe Ichigo has these different shattered things to him. But I also just think it's a cool word that Ichigo likes in English. Ichigo or Kubo, whatever. Anyway, um, yeah, I kind of, I like that insight into Rukia thinking like yeah, this is a victory because of the ways that she thinks about battle. We'd certainly see a little bit more of that mentality reflected forward. Um, I could have sworn. So, like, I went back and watched a few of the episodes of the anime around this point, and it's cool to see that, yeah, it's even more explicitly Yukatake in that flashback, whereas here we can kind of, in what was it, chapter 23 or so, we could kind of tell because of the hair, but not really anything else. Whereas in the anime, it makes it pretty clear with the coloration and his captain's sort of cloak on, Hayori, whatever it is. Anyway, not Hiyori, but Hayori. Anyway, Hayori. Uh, Japanese pronunciation. I'm an American. I speak English. I try, but come on. Anyway, there was a couple other things that I remember threw me because I was remembering the anime adaptation, not so much the manga. Like there's a whole Shinigami that shows up only in the anime to like interact with Rukia and to kind of give Rukia a little bit of flashback and stuff, and it's I don't know. I think I like the manga more where we get less of Rukia's past before she disappears, and we understand less about her, only in these glimpses that Ichigo has an interaction with her, and these sort of this sort of like, her slowly sort of sharing more and more with him. I think that's more effective, honestly, than having some other Shinigami show up out of nowhere. It also makes it, I think, more significant for whenever Rinji and Byakuya show up, because we finally see these other Shinigami, right? And I don't know if we see any other Shinigami before that in the entirety of the substitute Soul Reaper sort of arc here. Um, so it's like I don't think I particularly like the idea of having kind of retconning early Bleach to have this other sort of character show up early. That's bizarre, but I could have for sure like sworn that there was you know a moment where Ishin was talking to Khan in Ichigo's body, and Ishin realized that it was Khan, right? And it kind of gave you this notion that Ishin, of course, knew, and maybe that was later in the manga that gets like kind of retconned in, or if you know I don't know, like because I could have sworn that happened in the manga too, but and I watched a few of the anime, but I didn't see that particular part in the show either. So I don't remember if that was a show only part. I need to go and more thoroughly watch these episodes, or if it was just something that only brings up later in the manga. I think it's clear from the way that he doesn't refer to Ichigo as Ichigo whenever there is that little moment with Khan at the shrine. I think that's enough. It's subtle, but it's certainly enough. Here we have, you know, take this. I don't need it. This Getsuga. I don't know that I'm going to read the umbrella stuff. It's kind of passing the torch on Getsuga, or the final Getsuga even. Um, but I like the idea of him handing off this thing to protect Ichigo from the rain, right? And that the rain is really tied into Ichigo's inner world, and obviously that being raining on that day, it's this connection to grief, and then Ichigo has these different things to keep the grief out of the way, an umbrella being one of them. But it's a metaphorical umbrella that his father's also extending to him too. The gone for 10 years thing is questionable. I don't know if that's just a gag line or if that actually, excuse me, really connects to anything, because he says 6 years, and we get this little shot of Ishin there, and he's like, I was close. um I don't know that the 4 extra years has any sort of significance, though maybe it does. If it does, please let me know in the comments. It's been a while since I've even read the everything but the rain, right? That's still been over 10 years ago, so oof, it's been a real second for me. But yeah, of course we get this reflection that Ishin doesn't know. Of course he does, right? Um, and it's interesting because here we get this entire like, Ishin being like, hey, I also like Ishin smoking. Ishin and Ryukin both being cool smoking dads, but you know, like there's kind of an interesting kind of line of thinking about Ishin, especially uh whenever he's like telling Ichigo kind of how to live his life, right? uh you know of course the child was you, which is great stuff, but obviously there's a lot of other, you have Yawak as well as Grant Fisher to blame instead of Ichigo, who's blaming himself. But and maybe to an extent Ishin maybe even blames himself for being unable to do anything, right? Because this is clearly a hollow attack. He's Soul Reaper, of course. Um, we get him in all black here, kind of aligned visually with Soul Reapers. But I like this idea that Ishin's like, hey, you need to live a good long life, die after I do, and die laughing. We don't ever get Ishin dying in the manga. Interestingly, we haven't seen him I say we don't get Edition. I'm pretty sure we don't. I think he shows up in the very last arc, but doesn't really do anything. But I say very last arc, I mean 1,000 Year Blood War. We haven't gotten more Hell arc stuff as we're recording this, other than the first, 20th anniversary sort of chapter duplex 80-page thing. But yeah, it's kind of interesting. I wonder about like the 10 year after stuff and if Ishin's still alive then, right? Because I don't think we've seen him. And certainly if he wasn't alive, then he'd be in hell, which seems pretty significant. um, so that's interesting, right? To think about that in like terms of Hellverse, and that Ishin can't, like, obviously he's captain level Reiatsu, but maybe, I say maybe he isn't, but obviously he has it back, by that point later in the series. Um, Even if he doesn't this early on, because of the nature of his Gigai, I suppose. Uh, yeah, it's a lot, right? It leaves me with a couple of questions. But there's this kind of interesting kind of intersection where Ishin's like, "Hey, you need to live like a long and happy life, and then otherwise I won't be able to face Masaki." And Ichigo's like, "Well, I need to learn how to protect people and then kill Grand Fisher so that I can face my mother." And in a lot of ways, like Ishin ends up protecting a lot of people and then defeating Grand Fisher. And yeah, Ichigo does end up living, a longer life, certainly. So it's interesting, like, right, that of course Ishin gets that sort of final confrontation with Grand Fisher, despite all of this. Um, and yeah, you're too old. You're not old enough for the cool tortured look. I reflected on that a bit in the analysis. I don't think it works as well for me whenever, maybe that's why I generally am not a fan of the Hueco Mundo stuff comparatively. I don't like it as much as the rest of Bleach because I don't like Ichigo being in this kind of tortured place, right? I don't think it's cool. I don't like. It's like the edge. But I think I'm much more from Ishin's perspective. I like Ichigo as being this kind of punkish, protectorate kind of character, and I think that's much more appealing and sort of like all that. But we get a lot more of him being tortured, especially through Hueco Mundo. I'm glad that he gets kind of through that in a lot of ways, but it's a rough moment for our protagonist for sure. But maybe that's a little bit of, especially in encountering these hollows, maybe that's a little bit of foreshadowing, even, right? That Ishin sees maturity as moving past that sort of tortured and older sort of look, that cool tortured look, right? Um, yeah, yeah, we get a lot of this sort of protect people from the hollows. Obviously, it would become protect people more kind of generally as we get threats that aren't hollows, right? Um, and I think again, taking kill that monster as being more metaphorical towards, because obviously that the idea of the sort of, I think it's not even like that person that killed my mother, right? Which obviously, he wants to face his mother, right? It's clearly tied into that. But the idea that he doesn't say Grand Fisher, but he's like that monster. The idea that Ichigo wants to eliminate these monstrous foes. And yeah, it's got that personal connection. It helps link it towards like Ichigo wanting to kind of kill sort of those entities like Yawak or you know what is his face? Not Genjo, but Tsukushima, etc., etc. But yeah, of course, full moon again, moon connections to Ichigo, and again back to Hueco Mundo, which this is a really interesting bit, especially early on, especially thinking about how early on we get this for how much later this would come up, because like the whole notion of like the Arankar doesn't really get looked into like at all. I mean, we have a little bit of that with Ichigo, sort of kind of going through the Soul Society arc, but we really don't get a payoff for this for over 100 more chapters at least, and with Grand Fisher, much more than that. But here we have, I'm pretty sure his name is like Ice Rinker or something like that, or Ice Ringer or something along those lines. This character who would show up later, and I believe that he does battle with the entire crew right whenever they show up in Los Noches. So that's kind of cool that we see that character. But then, interestingly enough, we get Deroy Ritter. uh, Unmistakably, given like the kind of headscarf sort of part of his mask, I assume there, and the teeth for sure, and the hair. I don't know again what these other shapes, if that's supposed to signify any of their characters, or if it's just supposed to be that we're taking Deroy up here. It's interesting that Deroy's like, I don't like to clean up your messes, and certainly Deroy is a stronger character than Grand Fisher is, right? But Deroy, it's interesting that we have Deroy kind of shit talking Grand Fisher whenever Deroy is Fraction to Grimjow. So it's like this pecking order, right? But I guess it shows just how much Ichigo grows, speaks towards that to an extent. Yeah, jeez, I'm still trying to make out what is going on here. If you have any insight to that, let me know. If you think that's just maybe meant to be part of Deroy's outfit or something. It's difficult to kind of parse visually. But yeah, and of course we get this idea of the shattered mask making these into more humanoid kind of figures and being maybe even a power up. But we clearly have, you know, pre-Aizen, we clearly have these characters becoming Arrancar kind of naturally, right? Uh, so you know, it's kind of it's interesting that that's all there. Um, pre Hogekio, pre Aizen, all of that we actually get a glimpse of that this early on. It's kind of neat. Kind of neat. Um, I don't remember if this ends up being the design that Grand Fisher ends up having. I honestly can't remember Grand Fisher's Arrancar design at all. But I'll have to maybe look back at this chapter whenever we finally get back to it way later. Leagues later. um, Whenever that comes to pass. But yeah, that's it for this one. I mean, I guess the other insights that I have here, I don't have a lot to say about Tatsuki. Again, kind of already made the connection of supposed to be a mortician turned into a doctor at the last minute for the manga, but this idea of Ishin clearly having the black suit being a clear visual for his thing because he's clearly meant to be Tada Shinigami, and of course the white lab coat slash doctor's coat over it signifies him, of course, as a captain. So it's kind of interesting that we have that coloration there for Ishin, even in human form. And especially with Mortician, the idea that he's still connected to being this kind of psycho pomp, right? This Reaper, this sort of figure that helps carry people from the dead, forward, right? So that's all pretty neat, and I think all there from the beginning. But that's it for this volume and this 25th chapter of Bleach. Thank you so much for joining me on this entire reading. This has been Bleach Revisited. I am Karakura Gold. As always, never forget, spirits are forever with you. Stay gold.